Have you ever questioned the accuracy of psychiatric diagnoses? Today, we delve into an experiment that did just that. Welcome to the intriguing world of Rosenhan's experiment. This groundbreaking study, orchestrated by David Rosenhan in the early 70s, was designed to scrutinize the legitimacy of psychiatric diagnoses. Imagine a time when psychology was a burgeoning field, brimming with theories yet to be tested. Amidst this, the pressing question of psychiatric accuracy loomed large. Were the diagnoses reliable, or were they mere shots in the dark? Could an individual truly be boxed into a label based on a single consultation? These questions, and more, were the crux of Rosenhan's experiment. Psychiatry, as we know it, is a complex and delicate field. It carries the potential for both healing and harm, with misdiagnosis posing a significant risk. Rosenhan sought to investigate this very issue, aiming to expose the potential pitfalls within the system. In 1973, David Rosenhan conducted an experiment that would shake the world of psychiatry to its core. Rosenhan's experiment was simple, yet audacious. It was a bold challenge to the way mental health was diagnosed and treated during the time. Rosenhan, a distinguished psychologist, teamed up with 7 other pseudopatients. They were not patients in the traditional sense. No, this group comprised of a student in psychology, 3 psychologists, a pediatrician, a psychiatrist, a painter, and a housewife who were all in good mental health. Their task? To feign auditory hallucinations, a symptom often associated with severe mental illness, in order to gain admission to 12 distinct psychiatric hospitals spread across 5 different states in the United States. They claimed to hear words like thud, empty, and hollow, which were vague enough to not point towards a specific mental disorder. That was the bait. Once inside, the pseudo-patients would revert to their normal behavior. They interacted with the staff and other patients, participated in ward activities, and even kept notes of their observations, all while stating that they no longer experienced any symptoms and felt completely fine. The catch? They would have to convince the hospital staff that they were sane, which, given their false admission, was a feat easier said than done. The goal was to see how long it would take for the doctors to discharge them with a diagnosis of sanity. This was not about tricking the system or making a mockery of psychiatric care. Instead, Rosenhan wanted to test the reliability and validity of psychiatric diagnoses. How could professionals distinguish the sane from the insane? Could they tell when a sane person was faking symptoms, or would they be swayed by the initial diagnosis, overlooking the normal behavior that followed? These were the questions Rosenhan's experiment sought to answer. This experiment aimed to expose the potential flaws in psychiatric diagnoses. It was a daring attempt to explore the boundaries of mental health, to question the established norms, and to probe the very essence of what it means to be labeled insane. And the results? Well, they were as fascinating as they were unsettling. The results of Rosenhan's experiment were shocking and controversial. Just picture this. 8 perfectly sane individuals termed as pseudo-patients presented themselves at various psychiatric hospitals. Their only feigned symptom? Hearing an unfamiliar voice in their head, uttering 3 simple words, empty, hollow, and thud. Yet this single symptom was enough to admit all of them into these institutions, diagnosed with serious psychiatric disorders. These pseudo-patients, after admission, immediately resumed their normal behavior. They interacted with the staff and other patients, participated in ward activities, and even kept notes about their observations openly, often mistaken as part of their pathological behavior. However, even as they acted perfectly normal, their stay in these hospitals averaged 19 days, with the longest stretching to a staggering 52 days. Imagine being confined for almost 2 months, not because you're unwell, but because you're believed to be. This was the reality that Rosenhan's pseudo-patients had to endure. Their diagnoses ranged widely, from schizophrenia to manic-depressive psychosis, labels that stuck with them even after their release. These labels, based on a single falsified symptom, had powerful implications. It painted the pseudo-patients' normal behaviors and interactions through the lens of their supposed disorders, leading to gross misinterpretations and over-pathologizing. But here's the kicker. Despite behaving normally, not one pseudo-patient was identified as an imposter by the hospital staff. Their sanity went unnoticed in a place dedicated to detecting and treating mental disorders. Instead, it was the patients, those supposedly mad, who were more likely to voice suspicions about their sanity. This startling revelation led to a seismic shift in the psychiatric world. It raised serious questions about the validity and reliability of psychiatric diagnoses. Can we trust a system that readily labels normal individuals as mentally ill based on a single symptom? And if so, what does that say about how we understand and treat mental illness? Not a single pseudo-patient was identified as an imposter during their stay, raising serious questions about the validity of psychiatric diagnoses. The experiment's second phase proved equally unsettling. After the results of the first phase, Rosenhan decided to up the ante. He announced to the same hospitals that had unwittingly hosted his pseudo-patients that he would be sending more imposters their way. This set off a wave of paranoia in these institutions. They were now on high alert, keen not to be fooled again. In the weeks that followed, each hospital reported they had identified numerous potential pseudo-patients. They were certain they had caught Rosenhan's imposters red-handed. The staff scrutinized every patient, every behavior, every word. Everyone was a suspect. The hospitals were convinced they had successfully spotted the fakes among the real patients, and they reported back to Rosenhan with a sense of triumph. But here's the twist. Despite the hospital's certainty, the truth was that Rosenhan had not sent a single pseudo-patient during this second phase. Every single person they had identified as an imposter was, in fact, a genuine patient. The hospitals had been so focused on catching the imposters that they had misdiagnosed their own patients, proving Rosenhan's point about the subjective and unreliable nature of psychiatric diagnoses. The results were a hard pill to swallow for these institutions. They had been so sure of their ability to detect an imposter, yet they had ended up doubting their own patients. This phase of the experiment shed light on a concerning issue in psychiatric diagnoses: the propensity for error, and the impact of preconceived notions on objective judgment. Rosenhan's experiment was a stark reminder that in the field of psychiatry, certainty can be elusive. Even in controlled environments like hospitals, bias and expectation can cloud judgment, leading to misdiagnoses. It emphasized how the labels we assign can influence our perceptions and actions, often to the detriment of the very people we aim to help. This phase emphasized the subjective and uncertain nature of psychiatric diagnoses. Rosenhan's experiment left an indelible mark on the field of psychiatry. This groundbreaking study ignited a paradigm shift in mental health care, forcing us to question the validity and reliability of psychiatric diagnoses. The experiment's findings instigated sweeping changes in the psychiatric community, significantly impacting diagnostic criteria, the practice of institutionalization, and the emphasis on patient rights. Let's start with the changes in diagnostic criteria. Following the experiment, it became glaringly apparent that psychiatric diagnoses were not as foolproof as once believed. The experiment's pseudo-patients had been admitted to hospitals with fake symptoms, yet they received real diagnoses. This revelation led to a critical reassessment of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM. The third edition of the DSM, released in the late 70s, reflected these changes with a greater emphasis on specific symptoms and behaviors, rather than vague and subjective descriptions of mental illness. Next, let's talk about deinstitutionalization. Rosenhan's experiment highlighted the often inhumane conditions and impersonal treatment within mental institutions. It underscored the need for a more humane and individualized approach to mental health care. As a result, there was a significant push for deinstitutionalization in the years following the study. More patients were treated in outpatient settings or community mental health centers, rather than being confined within the walls of an institution. Lastly, the experiment underscored the importance of patient rights. Rosenhan's pseudo-patients experienced firsthand the loss of autonomy and dignity that often accompanied a psychiatric diagnosis. They were treated as their diagnosis, rather than as individuals. Following the experiment, there was a greater emphasis on patient rights within the field of psychiatry, including the right to informed consent, the right to refuse treatment, and the right to be treated with dignity and respect. Despite its controversy, Rosenhan's experiment remains a pivotal study in understanding the complexities and challenges of psychiatric diagnoses. It challenged the status quo and sparked crucial conversations about the nature of mental illness and the treatment of those diagnosed. It's a stark reminder that the journey to understanding and treating mental health is a continuous and evolving process. So, what does Rosenhan's experiment tell us about the nature of psychiatric diagnoses? It underscores the inherently subjective nature of psychiatric evaluations, shedding light on the fact that such diagnoses often rest more on the perceptions and biases of health professionals than on objective, measurable criteria. This groundbreaking experiment highlighted the potential for misdiagnosis and the lasting impact it can have on individuals, leading to a call for greater reliability and validity in mental health assessments. Moreover, Rosenhan's work sparked an ongoing debate, a crucial dialogue concerning the efficacy and accuracy of psychiatric diagnoses. This dialogue continues today as we strive to refine our understanding and treatment of mental health. We've learned much since the time of Rosenhan, yet his experiment remains a poignant reminder of our journey. While we've come a long way since 1973, Rosenhan's experiment serves as a stark reminder of the need for continual scrutiny and improvement in the field of mental health.